Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne, and today with my guest, Paige Park. Paige is the owner of Tulsi Rose Yoga, where she helps people navigate their body and emotions through yoga, meditation, and breath work. She uses these modalities to create a space where clients can get in touch with their inner voice and learn to listen to their bodies to meet their own individualized needs. Welcome to the show, Paige. I'm so glad you could join me today.
Thank you, Marianne. It's so good to be here with you and your listeners.
You know that when we first connected, I told you I was looking for people to help me with some segments on grief, bringing some type of grief topic into the show. And that was a request that I got from some folks in my group. And I was surprised to find that your work crosses over the grief topic. And I know we're going to get into that in a lot of detail around like what that looks like, but I think it would be super helpful if you could share your background and sort of what led you into this work, because I think some of the stuff you were dealing with puts us right into that space.
9 years ago, my divorce was final. 8 years ago, my mother passed away. 5 months after my divorce was final, my mom was diagnosed with a glioblastoma multiforme, which is a type of brain tumor that has fingers, and the fingers reach into the brain tissue. There's not a lot they can do. She died 9 months later.
Wow. I'm sorry about that.
And then my dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's a few years after he retired. This was several years, probably 5 or 6, maybe even 7 years before my mom was diagnosed with the tumor, was diagnosed with Parkinson's. So mom was dad's caregiver, and dad died 2 years after my mom. And then my brother, my oldest brother, we actually didn't know that he wasn't doing well. He died 2 years after my dad.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot. And in the process, like in the 6-year time span to lose mom, dad, brother, and then 3 of that 6 years, well, actually probably 5 of the 6 years. So 3 of the 6 years we were taking care of mom and dad. And then I was responsible for the estate. So we were dealing with like the estate and getting the house ready to sell.
That's a lot of emotion to have to deal with, and the divorce on top of that. So yeah, that's a lot.
Stacked.
Yeah. So you found your way out of that.
I found my way out of that through several modalities, but the one that really connected with me the most was yoga. And I sort of got into it in kind of a backwards way. I started my yoga journey in college. I took a yoga class as a PE credit, and then it kind of wove its way in and out of my life for years and years and years. I've been a classroom teacher for 24 years, and the school district that I worked for had a yoga studio who they did a deal with, and you could get like 6 weeks of classes for this excellent price. And I started taking the classes and developed a bond with this yoga teacher, ended up joining her studio, was looking for things to help my students because I was seeing so many more kids with issues with mental health, lots of anxiety and depression, and just skyrocketing in the education world. And I wanted some tools in some way to help my kids. And she encouraged me to do a yoga teacher training, said that I could even, because I was going to do it with her originally, said that I could even focus it on that yoga and meditation in schools, that she had a project I could write and I could begin, because I was going to work on curriculum. She ended up not doing the training in the way that she was going to do it that worked for me. And so I had to bow out. So I joined a different one, which I was supposed to go to Costa Rica in July of 2020. Yeah. And so that teacher has ended up becoming another huge influence in my life as well.
Isn't it interesting how yoga kept coming in and out of your life? It kind of wove in and out of there, right? Just popped up in all these weird ways, right? I mean, that's just life, right? Everything keeps circling around until we finally find what we need to find, or we work on what we need to work on, or whatever it is. But that's interesting to me. But also the people. So, the first relationship with that instructor and that studio ended, and then you kind of got forced, if you will, to go to another one. But that then took you to another level. It's so interesting to me how life sort of deals up what we need, right?
Oh, exactly. And then I hadn't even thought about teaching. Grief yoga never even passed my mind. I wanted to work with kids, background is in kids. I started working with some people one-on-one. I wanted to work with people who wouldn't set foot in a regular yoga studio, but felt that there was something within that realm for them, because that was kind of me. I still don't like going to studios. I have a couple here that I'll go to because I know some of the teachers and I know the way they teach. So I'll go to specific classes, not necessarily the studio. They teach the way I like, the way that resonates with me.
That makes sense to me. And I think it ties into some of the things that I know I wanted to touch on with you, because when we connected, I was very honest with you that I tried yoga a couple of times and I just don't really, it didn't fit for me, like the physical poses, like the traditional way in which we think of yoga. I'm not necessarily that person, right? That fits that sort of model. And you and I talked about how, first of all, any age, size, shape, whatever can do yoga, and there's different ways, and maybe you can touch on that because there's different extremes, but also that yoga isn't just what I was thinking of in my mind. It's not that physical pose. There's a lot more to it.
We in the West have taken yoga and turned it into an exercise and a workout, and it's not. It's a way of connecting with the body. It's a way of connecting with the self. Yoga means union with the self, union with community, and union with divine. And it's hatha, which is the kind of yoga that I practice, is a way of bringing the nervous system into parasympathetic, the rest and digest state. So it brings our body into a state of rest and digest and actually prepares the mind for meditation. It calms the nervous system. It calms the body. And the movement isn't meant to be a workout. It's meant to be a way to get into the body and the mind, using the breath, using the physical postures in whatever shape they look in your body. It doesn't matter. Just making sure there are some safety things, but as long as you're safe, my posture is going to look different than yours, and that's okay. And it's also going to look different in somebody else because we have different bodies and we make the shapes in different ways, which is why I've worked with some teachers who talk about it's a yoga shape, and your shape is going to look different than my shape. And it doesn't have to be this perfect thing, because I'm not flexible. People will be like, oh, I can't do yoga. I'm not flexible. I'm not flexible. I'm not flexible at all. And I've spent hundreds of hours studying yoga because for me, it's the mental aspect. In fact, I missed a really short meditation this morning because I was running late, and I could tell. I'm a classroom teacher still, in addition to teaching yoga. And I get to school and I'm really snippy. During third period, I was covering for another teacher. It was supposed to be my prep, and the kids were kind of annoying. And they were like, are you okay? You're in kind of a bad mood today. And I was like, oh, I missed my meditation.
So that's a daily practice for you.
It is. It is a daily practice for me. And it's a part of my yoga practice. There are 8 limbs of yoga. The first 2 talk about the way we should interact with people in the world and with ourselves. So with the world and with ourselves. Then there's asana, which is the physical practice, pranayama, which is breath. And then the next 4 go into the steps into meditation.
So when you do, I know you do a lot of one-on-one, you can do group, whatever, but you also offer these like 6-week sessions. Do you kind of go through all of that in your sessions, like Do you break it down that way or do you break it down differently?
I was trained in what my teacher calls the soul work method, and it's a hatha yoga practice, and I use her framework. And then depending on like if I'm doing a 6-week grief yoga class, I have each week is themed and the whole 6 weeks is like a bulk theme. So this first set, we're talking about actually different paths of yoga and how those different paths combined with meditation can help support us in our grief. And then we're going to talk about the 8 limbs of yoga in the next set and how the 8 limbs can help support us in grief.
So tell us a little bit about how you stumbled on the use of yoga for dealing with grief and kind of what you've seen out of that. Like what do most people get out of it? And are they reluctant? Because again, to me, it was like, really? How's it going to help? I didn't make the connection because it's not a widespread, maybe it is a widespread. I just wasn't aware of it.
There is someone that actually has the trademark for the term grief yoga, and they do some classes and teacher trainings, but they're not, until somebody told me about them, I hadn't heard of them. I literally stumbled into teaching grief yoga because I was at one of my best friends. I was at her spa and I was getting a service done from her. And she said, Paige, there's so much. She had lost some family members due to substance abuse and some other things. And so she was seeing a lot of grief within her own family. And then we often talk about the state of the world and just even the state of society now. And the grief within that is a lot. And the death and everything else that kind of goes with it, death and divorce and all of these things. And she said, Paige, you should teach grief yoga. And I went, no. It was my first reaction. But I've learned by my practices, by my meditation, that if my immediate reaction is, oh my gosh, no, I don't have the tools for that, I can't teach that I need to pause and I need to sit with it. And when I meditated on it, it was like, yeah, actually you do. So I do string different things together. So I've read some things on grief. I have my own grief experience, and my body regulation came back when I started back into yoga. And so making that connection for me was really powerful. And so I've just used my connection with yoga and how I've used yoga to help regulate myself. And that's where I teach my clients from that space of, this is what has worked for me. These are my experiences. Here, this might work for you too.
And so I guess in my head, I'm thinking I guess everybody's experience is different with grief, but part of what I think of when you think of a typical grief scenario is that kind of overwhelming feeling of all these kind of emotions all bundled together, right? There's all this love misplaced because you don't know what to do with it at this point. It's scary, and there's yearning for what could have been. I mean, there's a million feelings all rolled up into that ball. So I guess I can imagine that the work you do in trying to get closer to your own feelings and use breath work and that kind of thing to even things out and figure out how to like put yourself in that relaxed mode. Is that the place from which you're coming from trying to deal with all that?
Yes. Well, and then the body also, there's a book called The Body Keeps Score. When we stuff our emotions, which we in the West tend to do, and don't process and deal and sit with them and allow them to be, because sitting with grief is rough.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hardcore. And oftentimes when a grief event happens, we have to sit with it a lot for a long period of time, especially depending on the grief event. And we don't want to do that. We want to bypass it. We want to go around it. We want to not be there with it. So I work with people on how to sit with their grief and give them tools. I give them different breath, visualization techniques, different physical activities that they can do to help move the grief through the body. Mm-hmm. And I don't just always use yoga. Sometimes I incorporate a little dance. We shake sometimes, because sometimes you just need to shake it out. And so it just depends. So I'm trying to give my clients tools for when they have those moments when they're not on the mat and in the studio, that they have something that they can go to grasp that connected with them, that they can be like, oh, I can hold this and this will help me with whatever is happening inside. And so when we stuff those feelings, it's in the body. And I found that the movement of yoga and the different postures actually help kind of release that and chunk it up a little bit so that you can move it through. Because sometimes I've had people at the end of sessions, just tears in the middle of a pose, something comes up and tears just start. Now I've also had laughter, and that's okay too. Like all of that. So I work at creating an environment where everything that your experience is welcome. The anger, the tears. I had a client show up one day to class and she had just seen a dog get hit by a car on her way in. And she's had multiple grief yoga events or grief events as well in her life. And she was so shaken and so frustrated. And I was like, okay, well, here's what we've got today. Here's what we're going to do. And I've had people tell me that they feel the grief isn't gone.
Right.
It's never gone. It's always there. Someone sent me a visualization and I wish I could credit the person for it. I have no idea who wrote this cartoon where it says we grow. It was like we grow around grief. Like it's a ball of grief and there's a jar and the jar gets bigger around the grief, but the grief stays the same. And that's so true. So we grow around our grief and we have a bigger capacity to hold it. It's always there. But she says she feels lighter after class. Clients have said they feel better able to manage things that are happening in their life as a result of coming to classes and working with me.
So similarly, I think, one of the things I think I saw it on your website was around the work in this space, helping with, mindfulness and people being more filled with gratitude and having a better attitude and having more confidence. Can you elaborate on how you think that fits? Like how does, again, I go back to the traditional thought on yoga and how does that help me be more mindful? How does that help me have a better attitude?
When we create those connections within ourselves and within our own intuition, now I'm just a guide. I give you postures, I give you tools. And I even say this in my classes, you do not have to do anything that I have planned. If you're having a bad time and you want to hang and just be with us, hang out and be with us. Like you do not have to participate. And I've had people drop into child's pose as one that I give as if you need space to just be by yourself, here, this is your pose for you. And there's a couple of others I give that if you just need to chill and be, and I say, if you need me, wave, give me a thumb up, like let me know. Otherwise I'll leave you alone and just let you be there. And I've had people who will just drop into that in the middle of one of my classes because they needed that moment to themselves. So cultivating that inner awareness within inside. So as we connect to ourselves and connect to our emotions and connect to what's really going on instead of bypassing it, we actually create more mindfulness around it.
One of the things you hit on when you said this morning, you realized, or actually it was when your friend told you to do the grief yoga and you said something about kind of taking a pause. I think that was the spot. You said, you had to take a pause for a minute. And that's interesting to me because even just recognizing where our thoughts are and where we need to sort of flip the script or kind of bring in a different perspective, many conversations around the work that we're doing here in mindfulness, they all go back to kind of taking the pause, recognizing your thought, taking a pause to be more mindful in that moment, be more present to that moment and what you really need. So I can see how trying to tie into that and building a practice around some of these things, right? Just taking the time to recognize how you're feeling and kind of connect in. That's not something a lot of us do.
It's not.
Yeah.
We're very disconnected from ourselves and the world around us. And so taking that time to learn and to reconnect and to be with, and that's where, one of the things that has happened, mindfulness for me has come about out of meditation.
I was going to ask about meditation. I think a lot of us women in this demographic of, 50 plus who've lived our lives sort of being the everything for everyone, running in 50,000 directions, like super A personalities, all that stuff. It's really hard to slow down. It's really hard to just be, like you said, just be. And I know I've tried to meditate before and I'm not good at it. Like I've gotten a little bit better at where I can do like a minute or two, but there's so many thoughts going through my head, and training yourself not to focus on those thoughts, that's challenging.
It's disconnection from the thought. So one of the things one of my teachers has taught me, she says it's you like watch the thoughts like a movie. So you disconnect from the thought. So it's not, meditation isn't necessarily, it could be if you need it to be absence of thought, but sometimes it's just disconnecting and watching the thought from a third perspective and allowing them to just be thoughts and not get caught up in them. So allowing them to be there. And then I have breath that I can use. I have mantra that I can use to focus and connect to myself so that the thoughts are still there. They're not going away. They're not going to go away. I have another teacher that has talked about putting them in baskets and sorting the thoughts.
Oh, I like that one.
And yeah, isn't that nice? In my children's yoga class, because kids like connect, that was a way to help kids connect with it, to sort the thoughts into baskets. And I tell people you can pick them back up later.
Or throw them out.
Or throw them out if they're not true for you.
Yeah.
It gives you, if you're disconnecting from it and not emotionally attached to the thought, you can evaluate it and say, like, my reaction to my friend saying, Paige, you need to teach grief yoga. And my first response was no.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, wait a minute. Where's the no coming from?
Yeah.
What's there? And I took it into meditation with me and investigated the thought. And it was a limiting belief. It was a belief that I didn't have the tools and that I didn't have enough knowledge and then I didn't have enough experience to do this, but I do.
I love that example because, and you and I did not talk about this, but we just read Dr. Amy Johnson's Just a Thought, and her work is all around the fact that they're just thoughts, right? They're not fact. And we're not going to stop them because it's just what brains do. But we don't have to listen to them and we don't have to act on them. And I love your thoughts around, and she says one other thing that's a great analogy, and this probably would be good for kids too. Thoughts are like the weather. It floats in and it floats out and we can't control it. It's going to come, but it's going to pass too. And I love the disconnecting from it thought that it's going to come, it's going to be there, but just kind of look at it as a third party. And in your example, you did exactly, I love that. It's exactly the work we talk about because you took that thought and you took the pause and you looked at it and said, where is it coming from? What's causing this? As you are well aware, a lot of times it's the personas we carry from childhood. It's the things we've heard along the way. It's these limiting beliefs that are kind of always yapping at us. But you took the minute to kind of go through all that and then come out the other side and say, yeah, I'm going to toss this when it means nothing. That's the work, right? That's the hard work.
And that's the work we do. That's the work I use yoga for. It's the same work. It's just a different way of getting at it.
That's so interesting to me. Talk to me a little bit about, so you touched on it, but I want to go back to the work where you started for the children, because again, when I was looking at your website, I think I saw some testimonials there, and one of them really sparked my attention about how I think it was an autistic child and he was more attentive and he had the ability to be more assertive where he needed to be. I would have never thought any of these practices could help a special needs child, but I suppose that they're good for any child going through anything, really.
Any child going through anything. Yeah. And I continue to work with this kid. I've worked with him for about 1.5 years now, and he is now 14 and just started high school. And it's so funny. Last week, mom messaged me and said, hey, he's getting really snippy. He's getting angry about this, and this. Is there something that you can do to work in? And I was like, yeah, we've been talking about, so the first 2 limbs of yoga are the yamas and the niyamas, and the yamas are how you interact with the world around you, and the niyamas are how you interact with yourself. And so I took 2 of them, ahisma, which is nonviolence, and self-study. I can't think of the word off the top of my head, the Sanskrit word off the top of my head, but the other one was self-study. So I took a yama and a niyama, and I said, we're going to talk about these 2 together. I know we've talked about ahisma recently, but we're going to talk about them together and how to navigate frustration using ahisma and self-study. Now, we're going to have this conversation multiple times.
Yeah, he's a 14-year-old kid.
Because he's a 14-year-old boy, and we want to avoid the fact that we're angry and we want to blame the other people for our frustration. But we did. We had this, and he was a lot uncomfortable with the conversation that we had. But in order for him to grow, he's going to have to be willing to step into that little bit of uncomfortable. And so we're going to continue to talk about it next week when I see him, how your brother doesn't make you mad. You choose to react in that way, and you choose your emotions and kind of go on from there. And how to, like, I get that you're frustrated. That's fine. Frustration is a perfectly normal feeling. We can feel frustration. We can feel anger. We're not taking it out on our friends and family.
That's great. That's good work.
It's the joy of my heart.
Yeah, I bet if you can reach the kid, it's really fruitful.
And he's made not just physical progress, because that's what mom really originally started with him. So in addition to physical changes, so a child who couldn't sit quite on his bottom, he'll sit kind of on the back of his butt instead of like on the bottom of his hip bones, shoulders rolled over, very sedentary lifestyle because had been in so much physical pain. Now he can sit on his seated bones, so like on the bottom of the hip bones. Shoulders can be down and back. Still struggles to maintain that for a long period of time, but don't we all? It has given him a confidence that mom never expected. So she expected some physical results. She didn't expect the confidence. She did not expect the mental, emotional regulation. About 3 months after we started working together, churches opened back up, and the family went to church one morning, and he was not happy about it. And he asked mom or dad for the keys to the car, because he was going to go back to the car and do the breath that I taught him to help him calm down. And he did that, and he came back inside and was fine the rest of the time.
That's fantastic. So it's definitely giving them an outlet to handle their emotions.
Yeah. And to understand how to handle the emotions within the body, and what things we can do that will, if we're feeling anxious, how can we calm that back down? What tools can I use in the moment, because I've practiced them on the mat? So how can I apply? I would talk a lot about how can I apply this in life?
I like that. Not something I would have thought of for an idea for kids growing up, but I think it's a great way to help them learn to process and handle their feelings. So yeah, thanks for that, sharing that and kind of making us open up to that thought. So I want to circle back to the grief yoga practice and just understand if anybody was looking to really get into that, or kind of just start thinking about it, like what's a typical time frame that you have seen work, where people, again, it's not going to erase the grief. It's going to help them deal with what they're going through. What does that look like? When do you see people feeling like they've gotten to a point where this has really helped, and now I'm in a better place with how to kind of work through this?
I see people get relief after the first session.
Really?
Not drastic, but enough that they came back to the next one.
Okay.
And then the next one, and then the next one. I would venture to say 3 to 6 months, but also everybody is different.
Sure.
And somebody might come for 6 weeks and be fine.
Yeah.
And be like, oh, okay, I can handle things.
Take it and go with it. Yeah.
But they also might say, I can handle things now. I have one client, she's kind of like, I can handle things, but I appreciate the practice and the tools so much, and it keeps them fresh and in my life, that I'm going to continue to come to class. So I do have clients that are like that as well.
Sure. I mean, that makes sense.
The ones that have been with me from the beginning.
And if they really love it and come to rely on it, it becomes part of their daily, weekly, whatever the routine is, practice. So it makes sense to me that they might want to keep it in their life. So that's good. So I think this has been enlightening, and you've certainly shared a wider lens on how we can look at yoga and think about bringing it into our lives and what it can help with. I know for me, you have. I guess I'll open it up like I typically do and say, we'll put all your links and everything on the website, on the show notes, so people can get to you if they want to get to you specifically. Yeah. But is there anything else you want to leave my guests thinking about as it relates to sort of the yoga modality and everything it incorporates, or or anything we didn't touch on?
Well, if you're looking to start a yoga practice or you're interested in yoga, definitely talk to me because I'm going to break the mold of what you might think of as a traditional yoga studio. And I do virtual classes as well as online, or as well as in person. So it's not just limited and you don't necessarily have to come to class. I also work one-on-one, small group. I do family as well. You want like a family. I have a mom and son that are going to start coming and doing a semi-private grief class with me.
I like that.
I'm so excited.
I think knowing that people can get in touch and even just learn a little bit more about it, I think that's important, and knowing that there's this outlet, right? I didn't know. So hopefully we're at least bringing awareness.
I would also, because there are places that practice like I do and that teach yoga as self-care more than a physical exercise, because it is self-care and not a physical exercise. So I would also say, if you're looking for someplace and you don't necessarily want to connect with me, but you want to do something in person, look for studios in your area. Look for ones that do hatha. Look for someone that has hatha and not vinyasa. So look for something that has like a hatha yoga, because that will be more in line with something similar to what I'm doing.
That's great advice. Thank you for that. Thanks so much for joining us today. This was fun and enlightening.
Thank you. I'm so glad I could be here and glad I could shed some light.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review, as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.